Well, hello, folks, and thanks for joining us. We're going to get going in just a couple of minutes, but just wanted you all to know that if you can hear my voice, your audio is working just fine, and we'll talk to you in a couple of minutes. Folks, we're going to get going in just about 1 minute. Stand by. Well, hello, and thanks very much for joining us, folks. We're so glad to have so many people on the line today for 10 tips for a successful online engagement every time. So many thanks to our co-sponsors, the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation and the American Planning Association for helping to promote and sponsor this webinar. Thanks very much for those partnerships. I want to begin by just introducing myself briefly. I'm Dave Biggs, the Chief Engagement Officer here at MetroQuest, and I'm happy to play your host today. And I'm going to start by going through the agenda very quickly. I'm going to begin just telling you a few lessons that we've learned on a very interesting piece of research that we've just completed, surveying MPOs from across the country on their public engagement practices. And then I'm going to turn it over to the AECOM team, along with 3 very interesting agencies that have done some fantastic work in public engagement, particularly online, and they're going to share some best practices. I'm going to come back and round off the lessons that we've learned looking across multiple case studies for best practices in online public engagement. And then we're going to turn it over to you and open it up for questions. So if you'll notice in the box in the corner of GoToWebinar, there's a little question box. So anytime during the webinar, if a question comes to you, don't hesitate to put it into the question box, and we will get to as many of those questions as we can during the live webinar at the end of the session. So feel free to ask away. We're very privileged here at MetroQuest to have over 20 years of best practices research. We work for a variety of different organizations looking across the industry at what's working, particularly around online engagement, but just across the entire field of public participation for planning projects. And we also have some very interesting and forward-thinking customers that have always got hundreds of projects going on at the same time. So that gives us an interesting vantage point to look at what's working in terms of really generating exceptional results in online public engagement, and hopefully in webinars like this, sharing that information to help you succeed as well. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about some research that we've just completed. We surveyed MPOs, and we had got an overwhelming number of them to participate in this survey. Over 170 MPOs participated, and we asked them all kinds of questions about how public engagement is working for them right now and what some of their challenges and tactics are. So just to summarize, and just sit back and relax here, because we are going to be sending you the report that we've generated out of this research, so don't feel the need to copy these things down. But I just wanted to highlight a few of the top lessons learned. In terms of challenges, it's no surprise that MPOs are really facing declining participation. Poor participation is by far the #1 concern when it comes to public participation for MPOs. Secondly, in terms of priorities, it's not a big stretch to know that the #1 concern is increasing participation, #1 priority, but also mixed in there, improving decision making and increasing the breadth or the demographic mix of the people that are participating. Those were by far the top 3 priorities expressed by respondents. Very interestingly, over 75% of agencies are going out to the public 4 to 12 times a year for public participation. So that's a lot of activity with the public. So it's surprising that MPOs are really interested in focusing on what's working well for other agencies so they can replicate some of the successes. In terms of preferences, when it comes to the public, MPOs are really expressing the need to keep it short. About 5 minutes or less is around the magic number that they've been having success in terms of getting people involved in processes. So it really keeps the time to a minimum, but also making sure that things are interesting and visually interactive, but also informative. So that's what we heard back from MPOs. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to 3 wonderful presenters that are going to share with you case studies, 3 different, very diverse case studies where they've achieved success on public involvement, particularly online. I want to introduce Jim Meyer, who is a senior transportation planner with AECOM, Amy Elmore, who is communications coordinator at Pasco County, and Johnny Wong, who joins us from Hillsborough MPO, and he's a senior planner there. So I'm going to turn it over first to Jim Meyer to get started on looking at these case studies. So over to you, Jim.
All right, thanks a lot, Dave. Really appreciate the opportunity today, and I'm happy to be here with Johnny and Amy to highlight some of our recent success that we've had with MetroQuest. The slide that I have on the screen right now really is intended to frame the discussion today, and it acknowledges a lot of the public outreach challenges that we face as planners and public involvement specialists. Dave hit on a number of the issues that are summarized here. It really boils down to trying to maximize the number of participants that we can reach, reflecting community values, and really coming up with some meaningful input that can help in the decision-making process. And we have several engagement platforms that we can utilize. Dave mentioned the private input. MetroQuest is a great platform where it's convenient that people can take it on their phone, on their laptop. And, some people just aren't comfortable where they may go to large open house meetings, and you could have individuals that stand up and kind of take over the meeting or the group. And so we really want to make sure we're hearing everyone's voice. And so we've had a lot of great success with MetroQuest. And one other point I'll make is that using the MetroQuest, we can come up with quantifiable data. So we actually can rate scenarios and we rate projects and really get some good information to, again, provide that meaningful input in the process. Today, we're going to highlight three different projects, kind of giving you a large, mid-size, and a small example. But the messages that you're going to hear can really apply to any size project. So Johnny's going to be talking first about the Tri-County Transportation Plan. He'll focus in on the coordinated outreach that happened with 3 MPOs. And then we'll turn it over to Amy to talk about the Pasco County 2045 countywide LRTP. She's going to focus in on the social media outreach that took place as part of that process. And then I'm going to wrap up the presentation today talking about the Topeka Metro Long Range Transit Plan that AECOM is currently working on. And I'm going to focus more on that project to talk about how we utilize 2 MetroQuest surveys to really drill down and get some meaningful input out of the results. Overall, those 3 projects that I mentioned, 4 MetroQuest surveys, we've engaged over 12,000 participants, which has just been a great number, and really happy with the success that we've had there. So the first project I want to touch on is the Tri-County Transportation Plan. This was a project initiative called It's Time Tampa Bay. It's a collaboration between 3 MPOs, the Hillsborough MPO, Forward Pinellas MPO, and then Pasco County MPO. Between the 3 MPOs, we spent a lot of time developing the survey, which began at the beginning of August and ran through the 1st of October. So we're just into the process of really digging into those results, but we did reach that 9,600 participants, which set a MetroQuest record. But more importantly, the 9,600 participants provided over 234,000 data points, over 10,000 comments, and over 5,600 emails. So some really great information there, and is looking to be a really successful project. So before I turn it over to Johnny, I just wanted to highlight a couple keys to success here. I mentioned the survey went live at the beginning of August, but the planning and development of the survey actually began back in January. We had a working group that consisted of staff from Hillsborough, Pinellas, and Pasco MPOs. It included additional stakeholders, other consultants. And so we had 5 meetings before the survey went live to really drill down into the survey, look at the different wording, the questions, look at images that we're going to use. And we did a lot of testing. We came back and actually changed one of the MetroQuest screens because it wasn't working well, and just really came up with a great survey instrument. And that development time also allowed us to come up with a great outreach plan, which I'll turn it over to Johnny to talk about that.
Hey, thanks for the intro, Jim. Once again, I'm Johnny, and I was the project manager for the outreach portion of the Tampa Bay survey. This was a tri-county plan, which was a really big deal for us because these 3 MPOs have collaborated on plans in the past, but the 2045 update to the LRTP is the first time that we've truly done a tri-county long-range plan. And so it was important to us from the very beginning to convey to the public that we're working together. And all the planners who are on this webinar, I don't have to tell you that anytime you're doing an LRTP, MTP, STIP, or comp plan update, it's a very complex and complicated task. And working with 3 MPOs, of course, made this one no different. But thankfully, all 3 MPOs volunteered staff to collaborate on various assignments. Those things range from doing the socioeconomic analysis, the transportation and land use modeling, and of course the outreach, which is what we're here to talk about now. But it was really critical for us to work together because the Tri-County region alone has almost 3 million people in it, all of whom represent an opportunity to get meaningful feedback. We were asking the public for feedback on 3 very broad visions of the future, which were developed through a scenario planning process. And so those working groups that Jim mentioned, we met 5 times, and we devised scenarios that ask survey respondents to imagine a future focusing on, in the case of scenario A, new technologies like autonomous, connected vehicles, as well as bus rapid transit. For scenario B, we were asking them to weigh in on a future dominated by tolled express lanes and an interstate to boulevard conversion. And for scenario C, we were asking them to weigh in on a future focusing on transit-oriented development, including regional, statewide passenger rail, as well as upgrading bus service and frequency, and even water ferries. After that working group created the scenarios, we knew that we were going to have to ask the public to answer some very difficult and thought-provoking questions. So we knew that we needed a tool that would simplify things and really captivate respondents to maintain their attention through what could be, or what could have become, a very burdensome process. And so we decided to use MetroQuest for exactly those reasons. When we did the initial demo with MetroQuest, we found the tool to be very engaging and visually appealing, which was really important to us. And we also liked that it had the ability to weave in educational bits. We were asking the public to provide us with feedback on some very complicated, high-level topics, and so it was important to be able to educate them as to what the significance of the plan is and what it would mean for the future. So when we began to create the MetroQuest survey, we knew that first impressions would be important. And so you're looking at the very first screen of the MetroQuest survey, and on this screen, we wanted to give the respondents something interesting to focus on. We used the introductory slide to onboard respondents, let them know what was going to be expected of them, how long it was going to take, and we also used it to inform them about incentives that we had available to complete the survey, which we knew would help increase the response rates. When they click over to slide 2, we asked them to declare their values and essentially tell us what is most important to them. So that working group brainstormed initially, I want to say 8 or 9 priorities. We eventually whittled that down to 7. And we're asking the public to tell us which 5 of those 7 priorities they care about the most. And once they identify those 5 priorities, those carry over to the third screen, which is what you're seeing on the slide right now, and they're able to tell how those priorities are affected under scenario A, B, and C. So this screen was asking the respondents to tell us how either appealing or unappealing each of those 3 scenarios are to them on a scale of 1 to 5 stars, 5 being the best. At first glance, it seems like there's a lot going on in this screen, and don't get me wrong, there certainly is. But it was really important for us to give every person an opportunity to understand the scenarios in a way that would make sense to them. So at the very top left of this screen, we provided just a very brief one sentence explanation of what the scenario involves. Right under that, we had a slightly more detailed bullet point list of the projects that are encompassed in each of the scenarios. And then on the bottom right hand of the screen, respondents were able to see the results of the scenario on the priorities that they identified as most important. On the fourth screen, we were asking respondents to provide feedback on each of 12 individual land use and transportation concepts. So these 20 concepts were used to develop the 3 scenarios. And this screen was really useful because, say for example, they felt kind of so-so about either scenario A, B, or C, but they were strong proponents of individual pieces of it. They were able to provide us with that more detailed feedback on this slide or on this screen. And then lastly, we collected demographic info and emails so that we can ensure that we were getting proportionate responses from not only across all 3 counties, but from traditionally underrepresented communities, including communities that have high proportions of minority, low income, and unemployment status. When we finally finished developing the survey, we knew that we had a very valuable tool, but we also knew that the real challenge was going to be in getting it out to the public. And so we had a great engagement team on this project. And one of the things that we relied on that was critical to our success was having great relationships with our consultants and an extensive network of contacts who helped us do a lot of things to get the word out. We shot a short video, which we embedded on a survey-specific website, which would tell people what the significance of the survey was, how to access it, and what it would mean for their future. We also made presentations to every single one of our advisory committees, including councils, boards, chambers of commerce, etc. We went out to the public. We attended large community events like the Back to School Bash, which is hosted annually by the Tampa Bay Bucks, our local football team. We leveraged our contacts at the local newspaper, Tampa Bay Times. We were able to attend the Florida Home Show for free over Labor Day weekend, and that event alone had more than 12,000 people show up to it. We were creating such a buzz in the community that several news agencies ran stories on us unsolicited. So we definitely earned our media. There was a lot of radio and TV coverage as well as newspaper articles about it. And we had a modest budget for paid ads on Facebook, Twitter, and newspapers, which I think Amy is going to delve into a little bit later. And lastly, we printed off 500,000 flyers, one of which is shown on the right side of this screen. And our partners in the tax assessor's office were able to include those flyers in every single tax bill that went out to all of the property owners in Hillsborough County. As a result of our engagement and our promotional activities, especially considering that it was a very short outreach period, only 2 months, like Jim said before, we really didn't have a period in which we had lagging response rates. Over the entire period, we saw the responses continue to come in. And some of our success obviously is due to the short outreach period, but we were really mindful to continue monitoring and evaluating our responses. Seems like almost every other day we were trying to find new ways to promote the survey, and I mean the results kind of speak for themselves. In the end, we had almost 10,000 responses in just 60 days. Specialized outreach for traditionally underrepresented communities was also really important for us. We recognized that some people would not be very comfortable taking the survey in a digital format. So those people who have limited internet access or who are not comfortable on mobile devices and laptops, to ensure that we got responses for them, we created a PowerPoint survey which basically mimics the user experience that people would get by taking the survey online. So I'm going to click through some of the screens to show you what that experience is like. We mimicked it, or we modeled it exactly after the digital MetroQuest to ensure that we were giving people the same opportunity to provide feedback, and it was an overwhelming success. We definitely boosted our response rates by taking this out to communities who may have otherwise not taken the survey at all. We took that hard copy version of the survey out to more than 80 face-to-face meetings around Hillsborough County alone. That provided a similar participation opportunity as the digital survey, of course. We also went out to pop-up events at locations like malls, schools, transit centers, libraries, rec centers, grocery stores, Spanish-speaking bodegas, and as a result, we had very high response rate in communities of concern. Those small pop-up events allowed us to be very nimble, and so we were able to quickly identify underperforming zip codes and target those locations to provide additional engagement opportunities, especially in neighborhoods that had high proportions of minorities, limited English speakers, and disabled residents. We also created a Spanish version of the presentation and set up a Spanish speakers hotline internally. So for those who don't speak English very well, they could call a number that leads them directly to a native Spanish speaker who would walk them through the survey and basically troubleshoot any problems that they were having to complete the survey. Similar to creating the English version of the survey to take out to face-to-face meetings, we did the same thing in a Spanish version, and this is what that looked like. Social media was also obviously really helpful in targeting specific demographics around the county so that we could expose them to survey advertisements and promotional materials through Facebook and Twitter. And a few times during the outreach period, we saw that we would have to retarget our Facebook and Twitter ads to help improve response rates in those underperforming zip codes like I mentioned before. And so To hit those zip codes that had lagging response rates, particularly those with high proportions of minorities, we recalibrated our advertising parameters on social media, and as a result, in the last couple weeks of the outreach period, we saw the response rates among ethnicities jump up pretty considerably. And so in the end, and to wrap up, not only did we get almost 10,000 responses, but we also increased our responses across ethnic groups in the 2045 update from the 2040 update. So we had far more respondents in the 2045 across every ethnic group. And I'm going to turn it back over to Jim to continue the presentation.
All right, thanks a lot, Johnny. We're going to switch over now and talk about the Pasco County 2045 Long Range Transportation Plan. Some of you might be saying, well, didn't Johnny just talk about Pasco? He did. Pasco was part of the Tri-County Plan along with Pinellas County. But Pasco chose to do another MetroQuest earlier in the year to look really specifically at their county-wide issues. So one of the things that we wanted to really highlight on this survey is when we really started talking about it and thinking about the numbers that we would want to attract, we were really thinking maybe 500, 600 would be a success. We ended up hitting 1,600 participants and really got some great information that could help inform the development of the LRTP. The screen 2, similar to what Johnny showed, was used to help confirm and refine the LRTP goals. We had a third screen that was a follow-up on the specific topics where it was really intended to ask people their satisfaction level with that, each priority, and then they could provide additional comments or concerns. The issues mapping screen was very effective. We had a significant number of markers placed on the map, over 2,200 comments. So just really great input to help inform the existing conditions analysis. What I'm showing on the screen now is an image from the MetroQuest dashboard that shows you where the marker comments were placed. And if you were to zoom in on these areas, you can see the pink one in the lower left-hand corner of the county has over 1,100 comments. And if you zoomed in, you could see each of those individual markers. But I really want to turn it over to Amy now to talk about the social media outreach that she did. It was a great effort and really, we think helped boost the numbers. And before I do that, I also want to just mention that there were a number of small group meetings that took place here as well. So we're talking a lot about online outreach and that type of thing. But don't forget about those small group meetings and going out, and in between AECOM staff and MPO staff, I want to say there were probably 25 to 30 meetings that added up there as well. But Amy, if you want to take it away and talk about the social media.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jim. So we decided to use MetroQuest for this because it was so interactive and user-friendly. And we developed this incredible survey, but we had to decide how is anybody going to know about it? How are we going to get it to the community? So essentially, we had to start by creating a communications plan. First, we determined that our goal was to have 500 completed surveys by the end of our 2-month campaign. Second, we had to determine our target audience, and we knew that we wanted Pasco County citizens who were primarily 18 years or older. And third, we had to figure out the story behind the survey. This wasn't just a survey that people took. Why should somebody care? And the reason is because through this survey, they can make a difference in the transportation projects that are funded in their community now and in the future. So next, we needed to determine what methods we would use to let people know about the MetroQuest survey. In other words, our campaign approach. And we decided we wanted to create a customized logo, a promotional video, a social media campaign, a news release, coordinate several different outreach events, and we wanted to send out some email blasts to our local stakeholders. And we knew that through these methods, we would be able to reach our target demographic. So then we thought, how much work and resources are we going to be able to put into this project? We had to continually think about our ROI and make sure that our return on investment was as high as possible. So how do we make sure that our social media specifically reaches the right audience in order to optimize our outreach so we can work smarter, not harder? I think that's everyone's goal here. I turned to the data, and statistically, different social media platforms can actually reach different audiences. For example, Facebook users are typically women ages 33 to 54 years old, a college graduate, and a smart shopper, while Twitter users are usually 30 to 45 years old, an industry expert, and fiscally conservative. YouTube users are primarily 18 to 29 years old, usually college students, and they're very concerned with trends. And Instagram users are usually 13 to 25-year-old students who are very technologically savvy, and they usually respond very well to contests and videos. So for our audience, we decided that Facebook and Twitter would maximize our outreach and really reach our full audience. So next, we had to choose our platforms. We wrote our messages ahead of time and scheduled them out with a content manager. And we wanted to make sure that we posted these messages during the best days and times to reach the maximum amount of people. Statistically, Twitter users are most active on Mondays and Wednesdays at 12 p.m., 3 p.m., and from 5 to 6 p.m., while Facebook users are typically active on weekends around 9 a.m., 1 p.m., and 3 p.m. And ultimately, we thought about our audience. When are they at home relaxing? Are the students getting done with classes at a specific time? Are people going to lunch at a specific time? It's all about reaching your audience. And these statistics are national statistics. So we decided when we could schedule posts, and we used the content manager to do that out ahead of time. In addition, we crafted all of our posts so that each post includes a hashtag and a handle. That way we get the most amount of shares and retweets. But making sure that we included hashtags and handles, while that's very important in order to reach our maximum amount of audience, we also needed to make sure we included multimedia. And live video streams statistically generate higher numbers of engagement than any other type of multimedia. That includes pictures, GIFs, or even video. We chose Facebook Lives just because of our Facebook audience was so great. And our Facebook Lives allowed us to virtually interact in real time with our audience and walk people through how to take the survey, and more importantly, why they should take the survey. Overall, our results were incredible. We had over 2,800 people who visited the survey and over 1,600 completed surveys. Through our news and media, we reached 345,000 people. And with our social media, we reached over 12,000 people. Some news stations even did stories directly because they saw our survey on our social media platforms. And then they even shared our promotional videos on their social media platforms. So we were really able to maximize the incredible features that MetroQuest offered by our integration of social media. And with MetroQuest, we were able to get some amazing results that will positively affect our long-range transportation plan and ensure that our citizens' voices have been heard.
All right,
and
thanks,
with
Amy.
that, I'll pass it back over to Jim. Yeah.
Sounds great. Yeah, we had, as Amy mentioned, when we started this process out, we really were hoping to hit 500 or 600, and so we were really happy with that end result. So I'm going to end today's presentation talking about our third project, a long-range transit plan that we're working on in Topeka, Kansas. And this project had some great outreach, many of the same aspects that we've talked about in the first two projects. But I wanted to turn the focus a little bit to talk about how we use two MetroQuest surveys to engage over 1,200 participants. And through this process, we were able to reach frequent transit riders, but more importantly, we were able to get some information from non or occasional transit riders, which was really helpful in determining what priorities and what people are really looking for. The keys to success on this project, when we talked about the coordinated phases, the 2 survey pieces, we started doing that early in the process. We did that when we were developing the scope of work. And so I think it was really critical that we were talking about how phase 1, the results of that survey, would be used to develop phase 2 survey. And so talking about those together and thinking of it as a coordinated process really paid off and came up with some great meaningful input. I do have to mention that as part of another key here, we did similar targeting that Johnny talked about, especially on phase 2. We looked at zip code coverage to make sure we were getting good coverage, and Topeka Metro staff did a great job of really getting out there and going to the public and getting great feedback. So before the MetroQuest surveys, we had some idea of what people were saying. And you might hear similar things related to your project, but this being a transit project, we were hearing we need more service. We want buses to come more often. The buses don't go where I need to go, or you need to improve the sidewalk by the library. So it's information, but is it really useful information? And so using the MetroQuest, we were able to take kind of those themes and develop the priorities. And again, you see a similar screen here on the priorities that could be ranked. In Topeka, we asked them to rank the top 3. And out of those results, in the phase 1, we found that expanding hours of operation was by far and away the top choice, and followed by increasing frequency of buses and connecting jobs tied at second. So we still didn't really we had some information, but we needed to dig a little deeper to figure out what that meant. So on screen 3, we tied the priorities to the survey questions. And in the case of expanding hours of operation, we asked people to tell us, what does that mean? Do you want additional hours on Saturdays or Sundays? Is it on weekdays in the morning or in evenings? And then to tell us what routes that you want to see additional service on. The mapping screen proved to be a very valuable asset in this project as well. And going back to that one question that I kind of mentioned, where people say, hey, improve this sidewalk, at this intersection or this library. This really gives people the opportunity to drop multimodal markers down. So if you have a bike issue connecting the transit, or if you want to enhance service, you can drop that down onto the screen. And so we got some really great information. I'm highlighting the improve access marker that was dropped onto the screen. And so, we were able to get a lot of comments where people were saying you need to improve the sidewalk or repair this bus stop. A lot of good information that can help inform the decision-making process. The wrap-up screen on screen 5 is a common screen that collects a lot of good information, a lot of demographic information. But I wanted to highlight in the blue box another question that we added in there, because we really wanted to have a way to drill down into some information a little more in detail. And so we asked the question, when did you last ride a Topeka Metro bus? And we gave people the options to click on there. And we ended up identifying what we called frequent riders and occasional or non-riders. And we had about 230 what we called frequent riders, about 150 non-riders. We asked this same question in the second phase as well, so we were able to really look at this information across surveys. So the flow chart that I have up on the screen right now might look a little complicated, but I just wanted to point out how we took all of those 620 surveys and we broke it down where you see the frequent riders on the left-hand side in yellow. That's information that we took from screen 5 of the MetroQuest. We then did a crosstab analysis to see what the top priorities were for frequent riders from screen 2, and then we kept digging a little deeper to see if the people who had identified that they wanted more service hours, to see what routes they wanted it on. And in this case, frequent riders in Topeka told us routes 7, 17, and 10 were the top routes that they wanted to see more service on. Occasional or non-riders also identified more service hours, but they chose route 4, 2, and 1. So completely different routes selected. And when you map it, you can begin to see that frequent riders, highlighted in the yellow lines, were routes that extend primarily east-west out to the commercial district of the Wanamaker corridor, compared to routes 1, 2, and 4 in the red, that we started to look at additional data, and those were respondents that were asking for additional service. They wanted to connect to jobs and needed more time to do so and in order to get there. And so when you start to combine that analysis with a healthy neighborhood map that we pulled from the Topeka MPO, Long Range Transportation Plan, you can see that the red lines begin to overlap or would overlap with the areas highlighted in red on the healthy map, which is would be considered at-risk areas, a lot of the environmental justice neighborhoods. And so we really wanted to make sure that we're representing everyone throughout the community. So I want to wrap up with 2 slides here that came from the Phase 2 survey that we wrapped up recently. And you'll recall from Phase 1, we had the 3 top priorities. And so we took that information and we put those into a trade-off screen, which was a great screen because it really makes people make choices. And so we asked people about weekday hours of service, if they want that against buses arriving more frequently, or if they wanted new routes against weekday hours. The last 2 bullet points, we wanted to get a little information on the weekend service, Saturday versus Sunday service. And so the information that we got from this screen, combined with the budget slider screen that we call it, really provided some useful and surprising information. So the budget slider screen, we gave people a hypothetical scenario that if they had $1.5 million, where would they spend that money? And so those sliders, they could choose to increase weekday service hours between 1 and 6 hours. They could add Saturday hours of service. They could add new bus routes. And what we found was when people were telling us, that they wanted more service, when you actually start to break that down, we found that not only did that mean they wanted hours of service, but there was really a high response of people wanting additional routes in the area. And that was both for frequent and non and occasional riders. So that was a way that I think this survey just shows you that digging down in and doing some of these crosstab analysis can really present some interesting results. So I want to conclude here by summarizing 10 tips for successful online engagement every time. And I'm just going to run through the first 7 and I'll let Dave wrap up with the final 3. The first one being engage early. I talked about the Tampa Bay survey that it went live in August, but we actually started developing the survey in January. This doesn't mean that every project needs to have that amount of time, but if you do allow enough time early on, it gives you the time to plan the questions, go out, test those questions, make sure everybody can understand it, refine it, and really go out with a good survey instrument. The other piece of engaging early is to, once the survey goes live, is to really get out there and make sure that you got the outreach portion of the process going as well, to really promote that survey. The second tip to consider is if you're using something like MetroQuest, think about engaging in phases. And Topeka was a great example of how that was very helpful. We would not, if we had done just one survey in this case, we would not have found those results that we did on phase 2. So think about the process. If you're going to do 1, 2, or some cases we've done 3 surveys, think about how each one of those, what you want to get out of each one and how it will inform the next phase of the process. Ask the right questions, keep it simple, and again, this gets into picking the right MetroQuest screens and allow time to go through that and really come up with something that's going to work well. We talked about number 4 here quite a bit today on the multiple channels of outreach. Social media was a great way to do this. We're finding, or at least in these surveys, we're seeing that more people are taking the survey on phones and tablets. So we want to make it convenient for them to take that survey. One interesting thing that Topeka Metro actually did on their buses, on the signs of their buses where they had the route numbers, it would flash over and change and have the survey link on there and tell people to go take the survey. So think of creative ways to get out there. The social media and everything is a great strategy, really helpful, but still the go to them strategy, as Johnny talked about, making hard copies available, having it available in different languages really helped. The monitoring and retargeting, again, looking at where our responses are coming from and going out to underperforming areas. So looking at zip codes, and we did that in all 3 of those surveys that or projects that we talked about there, was really helpful. And finally, on number 7, really get into the results and think about the questions that can be helpful here to really drill down. And Topeka, again, I think is a great example of how a little planning time up front can really help you get to great results at the end. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Dave to wrap up.
Well, thank you so much, Johnny, Amy, and Jim. That was fantastic, and congratulations on your success. It really bodes well that, on how many of your critical success factors you used in each of these projects and how consistent your results were, and really appreciate you taking the time to share it with the audience today. I'm going to continue with 3 more tips that we've looked at that really, when you've examined projects across the country, there's critical success factors that I just want to add in here before we open it up for questions. Number 8, I would add creating a safe place online is really critical. And so when you're thinking about engaging people in an online setting, it's important to take into consideration that there's a lot of intimidation and bad behavior that can exist online, particularly in open community forums or social media. So by creating a safe place where people can register their views privately without fear of ridicule or abuse is really critical for a lot of people. Number 9, the importance of weaving in education into the experience. We know that people are not going to read PDFs even if you do post them online, but really dovetailing in the critical education around limitations or trade-offs or pros and cons of different scenarios, or even implications of different funding and trade-offs associated with these choices has been really critical to generating reliable data that you can trust is informed. And number 10, we've noticed looking across so many projects that it's so important to keep the experience short. Asking for about 5 minutes of somebody's time has been absolutely critical. When you make a survey longer, the participation drops off dramatically, and we found the sweet spot is right around 5 minutes. And I want to just slip in here a bonus, because I think looking at all of these tips together, the importance of making it visual and interactive, but making it interesting for people to complete is critical. And since Johnny, Amy, and Jim didn't show these examples, I just wanted to show some of these examples online, just to give you at home an idea on how they work. So here is the It's Time Tampa. And so the first screen just basically welcomes people to the process and encourages them to begin right away. Then people are asked what's important to them, and a very critical question to start with. So people rank their top priorities here, keeping in mind that we can't have everything as a top priority. And then we can look at different scenarios, and Jim showed some examples of how these worked, and Johnny highlighted even the mapping function, where you can dive into more detail about these scenarios and see how they perform based on your top priorities. So when I click, yes, I really like this scenario, I'm doing so knowing that there's some trade-offs as well as benefits of that scenario. So there's a lot of education built into this experience that I really liked the way they handled that online. And then, as they mentioned, diving into more detail here using a visual preference survey, so people could weigh in much more specifically on the options that are being considered for the 2045 transportation plan. And then, as they talked about the importance of collecting this demographic information, so you know not only who you're hearing from, but maybe where some gaps exist, so you can use some targeting along the way to fill in some of those gaps. So there's a variety of other examples that I could show, but I wanted to show you, I think, what's most important, which is the data that you get in the end. And these teams have been monitoring their dashboard here. This is MetroQuest Studio. So people, clients that are using MetroQuest are monitoring the participation as it grows over time to see what parts of the campaign are really working well. And this is what they use to dive into the results and really figure out from a demographic perspective, for example, who's participating. We love to see this, a diverse range of people across all age groups that are participating. And then, of course, when the project is drawing to a conclusion, using some of the tools to really dive in to the data, or even download the data for further analysis. So all kinds of ways of mining the data. And I think these teams in particular have shown some real best practices in terms of how to mine that data for all it has to offer in terms of giving you important insights into how the community is feeling. So with that, that concludes our 10+1 tips for online engagement success. So here they are here. I want to let you know that all of this is being recorded, and the slides as well as the recording are going to be sent to you. So don't worry if you missed things, you can review them at your leisure. And all of these tips combined are really meant to give you the confidence that you need when you're standing up in front of decision makers, trying to make the case that the community's voice has been heard. We've heard from a broad demographic that represents our community, and that the plan moving forward supports those views. And that's really critical when your views in your plan are being tested. So we really want to focus on how to give that person who's presenting those results the most confidence they can have. I also want to remind you that in the follow-up, we're going to be sharing with you the results of the survey that we did. So if you work for MPOs or you consult with MPOs, these results are going to really give you a lot of important insights into what's on the minds of MPOs as they consider how to improve their public involvement. With that, I'm going to launch a quick poll. And so if you have been multitasking at your computer, please come back to the screen. I'm going to launch a poll now about what additional information you would like. Because this webinar is educational in nature, we haven't gone into a lot of detail of the nitty-gritty about MetroQuest or any of the details around the program. And so we wanted to offer you additional opportunities if you came to this webinar looking for additional information, or if you are curious. You can pick as many of these options as you want. Would you like to see more case study information? Are you curious about pricing or any features that you might be looking for in an online engagement platform? We can provide you with that. Would you like feedback on how you're approaching public engagement now, and whether or not online engagement could complement those activities, and how you might best strategize to include online engagement most strategically? Or would you like a video recording of some of the best practices that we've collected in terms of using MetroQuest most effectively? So I'll give you a few more seconds to answer these questions, and then we'll turn it over to a Q&A. So here we go. 3, 2, 1, and we'll close out. Thank you very much for that input. We will be happy to follow up with you as soon as possible, personally, to as many of you as we can. We've got a huge number of people on the line today, but stand by. We'll get back to as many of you as we can as quickly as possible with that additional information. I also now want to turn it over to you. Now, we've already received a huge number of questions. We've got a lot of people on the line today. We're so happy to have all of you on board. We're going to get to as many questions as we have time for right now, and we will follow up with you individually if we don't get to your questions. So stand by for that. So keep your questions coming. Don't hesitate to ask anything you'd like at this point, but I want to open it up now and just address some of the questions that have come in so far. So the first question, lucky you, Jim. Jim, the first question is for you. So once everyone's on the same page on your team about the survey questions, can you comment on about how long it takes you to build an online survey?
Sure, Dave. You know, I think there's no magic number in there. You know, the Tampa Bay example, we had 6 months development time. I've also had other projects that have taken 2 weeks. I would say that if you can generally shoot for about 2 months at a minimum, and that's going to vary by project, but 2 months is a good time frame. That allows you time to develop those questions, test, refine, and a lot of that time might just be review time by your stakeholders or clients that need to you know, take that into account. So 2 months is a good mark. Anything that you can provide additional time, I think, just helps make it a better product.
Sure. Well, Jim, actually, I think that this person was asking in terms of the building of the survey itself. So after you've discussed internally, so the actual effort to putting it together, because I think people might be concerned that it might be a very time-consuming process, putting together the functionality.
Sure, and I think some of that depends on the different types of screens that you build, but for the most part, with some of the more straightforward survey questions, once you have that, the time to actually build it is probably could be a couple days. So the interactive features on the MetroQuest dashboard really make it easy to set up and really go through and make changes. So I would say a couple days to a week is a reasonable time frame.
I see. So the 2 months is a kind of a lot of discussion with the project team and back and forth and decision making, which needs to be done.
Yep, absolutely.
Right. Fair enough. Johnny, question for you. Can you explain what communities of concern are and how you identified them?
Oh, yeah, thanks. Good question. So sorry I forgot to explain that earlier, but MPOs are required to provide opportunities for the public to participate regardless of race, color, and national origin. But when we developed our non-discrimination plan, we wanted to expand those characteristics to not only include race, color, national origin, but also things like households without vehicles, people with disabilities, low-income groups, youth, and the elderly. So for us, communities of concern is like a unique branding that we have, but those are communities where we have high proportion of any two of protected classes. So for example, low income and racial minorities. We call those communities of concern, and we identify them because we have special resources to help them participate.
Excellent. Thanks, Johnny. I appreciate that. And that's a really innovative approach. And now, Amy, I know that you really made a lot of effort to try to get a broad demographic involved in your project. And several people are asking in different ways, what about engaging, for example, difficult to reach communities like older adults? Did you have any concern about their willingness to engage online or their participation in social media, which was one of your primary outreach tactics?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. As far as engaging our audiences, while statistically each platform might have a particular demographic that's highest, don't underestimate senior citizens. Don't underestimate people from different backgrounds. They are on social media. They may not, especially with senior citizens, they may not always be actively participating and regularly posting, but they're still wanting to learn about the community involvement. They're still checking on what's going on with their families and their communities. So they are absolutely just as active as any other demographic. They may not be the largest, but they are there. As far as reaching other communities, I think libraries now have a great resource for people who can't get to the internet, and people are going to the library. So especially working with the libraries to actually help walk through some of the surveys, reaching out to them and partnering with them would be a great idea in order to reach a typically difficult community to get involved.
Yeah, well, I love that answer, Amy. I really love the way that you and the other projects really targeted demographics and were considerate of the fact that some people might be more comfortable if you provided them with a device like at a library or at a community event where you provided the technology. And so not relying on people just, having their own devices and finding the survey, but going out to people with technology, but also as was discussed today, giving people alternatives. So if they prefer to use paper, to make sure that the results coming in from all of these angles are going to be comparable with each other. So I recognize now that I'm looking at the clock and we're 1 minute over. I wanted to end on time. I want to thank all of the presenters today, Jim, Amy, and Johnny, for their presentation. I'm sorry that we weren't able to get to the huge number of questions that have come in already, but we will be responding to those questions individually, so stay tuned. We'll be sending you a follow-up email with the recording and with the guide that we talked about from the survey results. On the screen here, if you're collecting AICP credits, there is the link for you. We will also include that in the follow-up email, so you don't have to scratch that down. But I wanted to finish up more or less on time at the top of the hour. And I want to conclude by thanking the American Planning Association and the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation for co-sponsoring the webinar, and of course for Jim Amy and Johnny for taking the time out to prepare this presentation and share their results and their strategies that they use for success with you today. Thanks very much for joining us, folks, and we'll see you again soon. Take care.